3,000 years ago, people say, a war was fought here. A war so famous that people are still telling stories about it today. For 2,000 years, nobody could answer one simple question. Did any of this actually happen? A queen named Helen was married to a king named Menelaus, who ruled a Greek city called Sparta. One day she left him and went to live in a walled city called Troy, on the coast of what's now Turkey. Different versions disagree on whether she went willingly or was taken by force. Menelaus's brother, an even more powerful king named Agamemnon, ruled a city called Mycenae and commanded the loyalty of kings and warriors across Greece. Agamemnon took his brother's loss as an insult worth going to war over. He gathered an enormous fleet of ships and sailed them across the sea to get her back. The story says they besieged that city for 10 straight years, camped on the beach below its walls, unable to break through. Then came the trick everyone still knows today, even people who've never heard the rest of this story. The Greeks built an enormous wooden horse, hid soldiers inside it, and pretended to sail away for good. The people of Troy dragged the horse inside their own walls as a victory trophy. That night, the hidden soldiers climbed out, opened the gates from the inside, and let the rest of the army in. The city burned. That's the legend. A wooden horse, a 10-year war, a burning city. Every part of that story comes from one person. His name was Homer. He was a poet who lived in ancient Greece roughly 2,700 years ago, a few hundred years by most estimates after this war was supposed to have happened. Homer didn't write this story down first, though. For generations before him, it was only ever told out loud, performed from memory, passed down like a very old family story, changing a little with each telling, long before anyone wrote a single word of it on a page. Homer is credited with 2 long poems. One, called the Iliad, covers a few weeks near the very end of that 10-year war. The other, called the Odyssey, follows one soldier's difficult 10-year journey trying to get home afterward. Both poems survived, copied by hand for thousands of years, all the way to the books you can still buy today. By the 1800s, most serious historians had decided this was exactly what it looked like. A good story, and nothing more. No real war, no real queen, no real wooden horse, and most importantly, no real city. As far as anyone could actually prove, a place called Troy had never existed anywhere except inside Homer's poems. Then, in the 1870s, one man said he'd found it. This is exactly where we are. This story takes place in the far northwest corner of modern-day Turkey, right next to a narrow strip of water called the Dardanelles. That strait is important on its own. It's one of the narrowest points where Europe and Asia almost touch, which made it a valuable, fought-over spot for thousands of years, long before and after this particular story. This hill sits a few miles from that coastline. Today, the closest village is called Tevfikiye, in Turkey's Çanakkale province. But the hill itself, historically, has gone by a different name. Homer's poems call the city Troy, or sometimes Ilios. That's the name everyone knows. But by the 1800s, almost nobody living there called it that anymore. Local people simply knew the hill as Hisarlik, meaning place of the old fortress in Turkish. Nobody living nearby was calling it Troy. That's actually part of why it took so long for anyone to connect this ordinary-looking hill to Homer's famous city. Today, the name has come full circle. The official archaeological site is simply called Troy again, Truva in Turkish, even though the hill itself is still sometimes referred to by its old name, Hisarlik, especially in older books and research papers. Both names point to the exact same hill. Who actually controlled this land across all that time? Around 3,000 years ago, if a city really did exist on this hill, it likely wasn't fully independent. It sat near the western edge of a large, powerful empire called the Hittites, based further east in what's now central Turkey. The Hittites kept written records of this coastline, and those records turn out to matter a great deal later in this story. Centuries later, this land became Greek territory, and later still, part of the Roman Empire. The Romans actually rebuilt a city on this exact hill, and named it after the old legend. Then, for the centuries leading right up to the 1800s, this entire region belonged to the Ottoman Empire, a huge, powerful state based in Istanbul that, at its peak, ruled land across 3 continents. It was under Ottoman rule, in this same 19th century, that search for the real Troy was finally about to begin. His name was Heinrich Schliemann. By the time he went looking for Troy, he was already one of the strangest success stories of his century. He didn't start out rich. He worked ordinary jobs as a young man, in shops and trading houses, and taught himself several languages along the way. One of the ways he built his fortune was by trading indigo, a deep blue dye made from crushed plants. It's the same shade of blue used to dye blue jeans today. In the 1800s, a good dye like this was extremely valuable and shipped all over the world. Getting it to the right buyer at the right time could make someone rich fast. He also made money running a small bank during the California gold rush, buying and reselling gold dust, and later by supplying the Russian military with equipment during the Crimean War, a conflict fought in the 1850s. By his mid-30s, he was rich enough to stop working entirely. What he wanted to do next was find Troy. Schliemann was not always honest about his own life story. That habit shows up again and again in what happened next. He told more than one version of how his obsession with Troy began. In one version, his father gave him a picture book as a child that showed a burning ancient city, and he never forgot it. In another version, he was a young shop worker who overheard someone reciting one of Homer's poems out loud in ancient Greek, and that moment changed his life. Historians who've gone back through his personal letters have found quite a few small, and not so small, invented details throughout his life. Keep that in mind. Schliemann built his own story the same way he was about to dig through Troy. Fast, dramatically, and without much concern for getting every detail exactly right. Long before Schliemann showed up, a much quieter man had already done the real work of finding this place. Frank Calvert was a British-American living in this region since the 1840s, working as a local diplomat for his family. His family owned a large farm nearby that happened to include part of the hillside hill. Years before Schliemann arrived, Calvert dug his own small test digs on that land and became convinced this ordinary-looking hill really was the site of ancient Troy. The problem was money. He simply couldn't afford to dig the whole site properly himself. In 1868, Heinrich Schliemann came to him for advice. Calvert gave him everything he had, his research, his theory about the site, and permission to dig on his land. That generosity would not be returned. In 1871, with Calvert's help and a permit from Ottoman officials, Schliemann began digging at hillside. He didn't dig carefully. He dug like a man in a hurry, hundreds of hired workers, moving as much dirt as physically possible, as fast as possible. Within 2 years, his crews had cut a trench nearly 17 meters deep, that's roughly as tall as a 5-story building, straight down through the center of the hill. Archaeologists still call it Schliemann's Trench today. Schliemann either didn't understand or didn't care to slow down for it. Picture a layer cake. Every time this hill was destroyed, abandoned, or simply built over, a brand new town rose right on top of the old one's ruins, again and again for 3,000 years. Each layer is a separate, complete city, stacked on the one before it. Archaeologists count at least 9 of these layers at hillside, from the oldest, dating back roughly 5,000 years, all the way up to a city built here under the Romans. Each layer holds different objects, different buildings, and different evidence, sealed at a different depth in the ground. Schliemann assumed the oldest layer, right at the bottom, simply had to be Homer's Troy. So his crews dug straight down through every layer above it, as fast as they could, barely writing down anything about what they were destroying along the way. No maps of where things were found. Almost no notes describing what got torn through to get there. A complicated puzzle, made far more complicated by the one man trying to solve it. While all this digging was happening, Schliemann's partnership with the man who'd made it all possible was quietly falling apart. Schliemann published his early findings without properly crediting Calvert's years of research. When Schliemann's crew found a valuable carved stone artwork on Calvert's side of the property line, Schliemann simply bought that section of Calvert's land from him, for what historians now describe as a very low price. By the time Schliemann became world famous, Calvert had no way to compete with the story Schliemann was telling about himself. The quiet, local expert who'd actually identified this site first would spend the rest of his life trying, mostly without success, to get some of the credit back. In May of 1873, Schliemann's crew hit something extraordinary. A hoard of gold and silver, headbands, thousands of tiny gold rings, bracelets, cups, and finely made weapons. Schliemann named it immediately, before anyone had properly studied it. Priam's treasure, after the legendary king who ruled Troy in Homer's story. As far as he was concerned, this was the proof. He'd found Homer's actual gold. Schliemann later told a dramatic story about how he got the treasure out of the country, that his wife, Sophia, secretly wrapped the gold in her shawl during a lunch break, while the Ottoman government's site inspector wasn't looking. He later admitted that part wasn't true. Sophia wasn't even in the country when the treasure was found. She was back home, dealing with her father's recent death. What is true is that the treasure did leave the country illegally, breaking the terms of Schliemann's own digging permit. The Ottoman official assigned to watch the site was punished with prison time over it. Ottoman authorities canceled Schliemann's permit and sued him for a share of the gold. And then, almost defiantly, Schliemann had Sophia photographed wearing the jewelry in public, presented to newspapers around the world as the Jewels of Helen, after the legendary queen from the story. But there was a serious problem. Modern testing shows Priam's treasure didn't come from the time of Homer's war at all. It actually came from a much older layer of the same hill, roughly 1,000 years before any version of the Trojan War could possibly have happened. Schliemann had found something spectacular. He'd smuggled it out of a country illegally, named it after a king who almost certainly never touched it, and destroyed real evidence getting to it. It turns out, he dug straight through the layer he was actually looking for on his way to a much older one. Schliemann kept digging at his Arlik until his death in 1890. His young assistant, an architect named Wilhelm Dorpfeld, took the work far more seriously than his mentor ever had. Working through the 1890s, Dorpfeld found a much stronger candidate for Homer's city. A layer archaeologists now simply call Troy 6, a large, well-built, heavily walled settlement from roughly the right time period, with the kind of serious defenses a real, important city would actually need. But this wall tells its own story. Later archaeologists found it tilted sharply off its original straight line, a sign of an earthquake, not a war. Troy 6 was likely destroyed by nature, not by an invading army. Close to the right city, but probably not the one Homer described. In the 1930s, an American archaeologist named Carl Blegen led a research team back to the site, decades after Schliemann had died, using far more careful methods than Schliemann ever had. Just above Troy 6, Blegen found a thinner, poorer, more hastily built settlement. Archaeologists call it Troy 7A. And unlike Troy 6, this one clearly burned. Inside its ruins, large storage jars, buried in a rush into the floors of ordinary houses. The kind of thing people do when they expect to be trapped inside their walls for a long time and need to hide food and water somewhere safe. Piles of stones, stacked up on purpose near the gates, supplies for throwing at attackers. And scattered through the wreckage, human remains left unburied among signs of sudden fire and violent collapse. Not a city that slowly emptied out and fell apart over time. A city that ended fast and badly. Troy 7A was destroyed by fire sometime around 1100 to 1200 BC. Sources differ slightly on the exact year. Today, most archaeologists consider this the strongest match yet for the city Homer was writing about. Not the gold-filled, much older layer that made Schliemann famous. The layer that actually matters most sat close to the surface, almost exactly where Schliemann's crews tore through fastest, racing down toward the gold. Whatever evidence sat in the sections he plowed through without recording is simply gone now. Not hidden somewhere, waiting to be found later. Gone. Details about exactly how buildings related to each other. Materials that could have been tested to find their true age. Clues about exactly how this particular city actually fell. There's a simple way archaeologists sum up the irony today. He found Troy. He also destroyed part of it. There's a second discovery that changed the picture even further. Starting in 1988, a German archaeologist named Manfred Korfmann led a new dig, using scanning technology Schliemann could never have imagined. He found that Troy wasn't just the small hilltop fort Schliemann had dug through. A much bigger city surrounded it, as much as 15 times larger than anyone had assumed, defended by a wide ditch cut straight into solid rock. This wasn't a minor village. It was a real important city, one worth fighting a real war over. Separate from anything dug out of this hill at all, there's another kind of evidence, written down by a completely different civilization, one that had never read a word of Homer. The Hittite Empire. They repeatedly mention a smaller territory under their influence, on their western coast, called Wilusa. Many language experts believe that name is an early version of Ilios, Homer's other name for Troy. Around 1280 BC, a Hittite king named Muwatalli II signed a formal peace agreement with the ruler of Wilusa. That ruler's name, written into the agreement, was Alexandru. Language experts have long noticed that name is basically the same as Alexandros, the other name Homer gives Paris, the Trojan prince whose actions supposedly start the whole war. But that agreement was signed decades before Troy was ever destroyed, roughly a century earlier. So this specific king almost certainly wasn't Homer's Paris. And the Hittite records that do mention conflict over this territory never actually say it turned into a full war, let alone one fought over a kidnapped queen. What this evidence does prove is simpler and still remarkable. A real place, matching Troy's name and location, was important enough that a major empire wrote formal agreements about it, named its rulers, and recorded disputes over it, decades before that same city burned to the ground. Homer didn't invent this place out of nothing. He almost certainly built his poem on top of something that really happened here, even if we'll never know exactly how closely his version matches the truth.
As for Priam's treasure itself, Schliemann eventually gave the bulk of it to a museum in Berlin, Germany, in 1881. During heavy fighting in Berlin in 1945, near the end of the Second World War, Soviet soldiers took the treasure and shipped it to Moscow. For almost 50 years afterward, the Soviet government publicly denied even having it. In 1994, Moscow's Pushkin Museum finally admitted it had the gold all along. In 1998, the Russian government formally declared it belonged to Russia now, as partial payback for the destruction Germany caused during the war. Germany has asked for it back. Russia has kept it. The treasure Schliemann illegally carried out of one country in a shawl now sits, still disputed, in a third country. Not the country it was actually dug out of. As for Frank Calvert, the man who actually identified this site, years before Schliemann ever set foot on it, he died in 1908, mostly written out of the story he'd made possible in the first place. Most of his personal papers and unfinished research simply disappeared after his death. It's only in recent decades, through old letters historians tracked down and pieced back together, that his real role in this story has started to be properly recognized. Schliemann got a hero's monument. Calvert got a footnote for about 100 years. Today, this land is part of the modern Republic of Turkey, which has governed it since the 1920s. The hill at Hisarlik is a protected archaeological park and has been an official UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1998, recognized as one of the most historically important places on Earth. Visitors can walk right up to Schliemann's old trench and past a large wooden horse built for tourists to pose next to, standing at the exact spot where an old legend meets reality. Hundreds of thousands of people visit every single year, most of them knowing only the legend, the horse, the 10-year war, the burning city, and few of them knowing this second story, the story of the man who proved it was real and the evidence he destroyed proving it. The man who finally proved this place was real, a wealthy, driven amateur who told different versions of his own childhood as easily as he told different versions of how he smuggled a king's treasure out of the country, got there by digging through the evidence faster than anyone could stop him.
The quiet man who actually found this place first spent his life fighting for credit he mostly never got. The physical proof of exactly how this city's story really ended is partly gone forever, cut through by a man in too much of a hurry to write down what he was destroying. Even so, the discovery of Troy never really finished. Archaeologists are still digging at this hill today, still testing old assumptions, still occasionally proving a long-held theory wrong. Every few years, this hill finds a way to rewrite its own story again. 3,000 years ago, something real most likely happened on this ordinary-looking hill. Exactly what, and exactly how it ended, is still being pieced together, one careful season of digging at a time.
If you want to dig deeper, check sources in the description.
And if you want more stories like this, hitting like and subscribing genuinely helps. It's what keeps us going.